Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Beis Amud Beis 2b of Maseches Brachos. We are starting 4 lines from the top of the page, and the Gemara is just coming off of a discussion regarding when Kohanim are allowed to begin eating Truma following a period where they were tameh, where they were impure. So the Gemara had said that as they don't need to bring their carbon, even if a carbon is part of the purification process, that's not required to be allowed to eat Truma again. All they need is to go to the mikveh on the last day of their purification process, and then with Harav Shemesh, with the setting of the sun, and when Tzeis HaKochavim comes, when the stars come out, they are allowed to eat Truma. And the Gemara interpreted the pasuk that said Uva Hashemesh v'taher, and the sun will set, and the sky and the sky will be pure. That's how I interpret the pasuk. And v'achar yochal mi'hakadashim, and then he can eat from the kosher, from the holy foods, meaning from Truma. And the Gemara had asked, how do we know that that's what it means? Maybe it means, the way that Rashi explained it, maybe it means that when the sun rises, Uba Hashemesh, maybe it could mean when the sun comes, when the sun rises, Vitaher, and the Kohen he purifies himself. He goes to the mikvah in the morning, the next day, only then, not when he goes to the mikvah. Vitaher, he brings his carbon. Only after he brings his carbon could he eat Truma. In other words, maybe he can't eat Truma until he brings his carbon. And to which the Gemara answered that Vitaher sounds like it's talking about the sky, the sun, and not the person himself. If it was the person himself that he had to be part of this process at this point, it would have said V'yitaher. He purifies himself by bringing the carbon. The Vitaher implies that it's talking about the sun itself. Uva Shemesh, the sun sets Vitaher, and the sky is pure, and there's no sun there. So that was the answer that Rabba bar Rav Shila gave to explain how we know to understand the pasuk that way. Okay, now says the Gemara 4 lines down, B'ma'arava, in the west, in Eretz Yisrael, Ha-de Rabba bar Rav Shila lo shmiya lahu. They had not heard this answer of Rabba bar Rav Shila. Uba'u lami bai. And so they had this as a question. They posed the following question. Our question, Ha Uba Shemesh. When it says Uba Shemesh and the sun comes, Biyashim shahu, does it mean the sun sets? Umay v'taher tar yom. And when it says and v'taher, it's pure, it means the day is pure, the day is gone. Odilma, or maybe biyas orahu, maybe it means the sun rises. Umay v'taher tar gavra. And when it says and it's purified, it means he purifies himself, meaning he brings his carbon. That was the question that they asked, and they did not know Rabba bar Rav Shila's answer, how it could be deduced from the pasuk that Vitaher must mean the sky. So they had this question, and they answered it from a brisa, meaning they didn't have a textual source in the pasuk, they didn't have a reading in the pasuk that gave them the answer, but they had a brisa that gave them the answer of how to interpret it. Because the brisa says, Midiktani bebrisa, the brisa said that the Kohanim could eat Truma, or actually the brisa says that they can, you start reading the Shema from the time that the Kohanim enter to eat Truma, and then it says, and it's a brisa coming up that we're going to have in a few lines, and our Gemara now quotes it, Midiktani bebrisa, simin ladaber tzeis hakochavim, that the sign for that is when the stars come out. So it says that the Kohanim could begin to eat Truma when the stars come out. So Shema Mina, so we can learn from here how the earlier sages, the sages, the Tanaim of the Brisa understood the pasuk. Shema Mina, Biyashim Shohu. So we can learn from here that they understood it to mean when the sun sets. Umay v'taher tar yom. And when it says v'taher and it's purified, it means the day is purified, meaning the sun is gone. It's completely dark, it's Tzeis HaKochavim, that's when you're allowed to eat Truma, that's when the Kohanim can eat Truma. That's how clearly the sages of this brisa interpreted the pasuk. Okay. Amar Mar. Now we quote again the Mishnah. It says, Misha shekanim tasen achal b'trumasan. that what's the earliest time for saying the evening Shema? It's from the time when the Kohanim enter to eat Truma. Ask the Gemara Vera Minu, but we have a contradiction from another Brisa. A Brisa says, Me'emasai karing Shema ba'arvin. From when are you allowed to read the Shema in the evening? So the same question, but he gives a different answer. It says, Misha ani nichnas lecho pito b'melach. It's from the time that a poor person enters to eat his bread with salt. And when's the latest time? Ad shah she'omed li pater mitoch suda. So the latest time is when he gets up from his meal. So the time for the evening Shema, according to this Brisa, is when a poor person enters to eat his bread with salt, and it ends at the time that he would get up from his meal. So the Gemara says this is a contradiction to our Mishnah. Now first the Gemara has to clarify what is the contradiction. It says, Seifa vadai pliga amas nisan. The second part is definitely arguing on our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that the latest time for Shema is either, the first opinion, Rabbi Eliezer said that it's the end of the first watch, which is a third into the night, 4 hours into the night. And the Chum said even later, midnight, chatzos, which really meant the morning, and Rabbi Gamliel said the morning. So this Brisa says when the poor person finishes his meal. That's definitely earlier than all of those times. It's even earlier than the end of the first watch. So the Seifa, the second half of this Brisa about what's the end time for Shema, is definitely disagreeing with our Mishnah. And it seems to interpret, as Rashi says, b'shach b'cha, when you lie down, to mean the beginning time when people lie down. You need to read the Shema by the time people start to lie down. And when do people start to lie down? When they finish dinner. When they finish, well, at least when a poor person finishes his dinner, that's the time that people start to lie down. Okay, now so the Seifa, the second half, is certainly a contradiction. Or at least it's arguing on the Mishnah. Reisha, but what about the first half? Mi lema pligi amas nisan. Should we assume it's arguing on our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says, everybody agreed in our Mishnah what the earliest time is. It's when the Kohanim enter to Truma, which we say is Tzeis HaKochavim, when the stars come out. That's the earliest time for Shema. And this Brisa says the earliest time for Shema is when a poor person begins to eat his meal, his bread. So isn't it arguing? Says the Gemara, no, it's not necessarily arguing. Ani v'kohen chad shiurahu. That is the same time. It's one shir, it's one time. The time that the Kohanim enter to eat Truma, which is Tzeis HaKochavim, is the same time as a poor person enters to eat from his bread. So it's not arguing, it's the same time. Okay. Ask the Gemara Viraminu. But we have a contradiction to that. Because we have another Brisa, and it says, from when can you start reading the Shema in the evening? It's the time that people enter to eat their bread on Friday nights. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And on Friday night, as Rashi points out, you eat right away, because you don't have to cook anything. It's already prepared. So typically, when a person will get home from work, then they have to cook, and by the time they eat their meal, it will be a bit later than nighttime, than dark. But on Friday night, as soon as they get home, they could eat. So that's Rabbi Meir's opinion. The Chachamim Omrim, and the Chachamim say, Mishasha Kohanim Zakayin Lechol B'Trumasan. It's the time, the Chachamim say it's the time that the Kohanim are allowed to eat from their Truma. Simin L'davar Tzeis HaKochavim, and the sign for that is Tzeis HaKochavim. So now we have, again, the opinion of the Chachamim, which is agreeing with our Mishnah, that the time to eat Truma, the time to say the Shema, the earliest time for Shema in the evening is when the Kohanim enter to eat their Truma. But Rabbi Meir is giving a different time. Rabbi Meir is saying that the time is when people begin their meal on Friday night, which is apparently a bit earlier than Tzeis HaKochavim, than when the stars come out. Okay, so now the Brisa goes on, and the Brisa says, and by the way, I'll just mention that if you receive the emails, I intend to send a chart from dafyomi.org.co.il that has, we're just getting started on the different opinions of when the time for eating, for saying the evening Shema begins, and so that might be able to help you keep track. But we'll keep recapping what we have. So now the Brisa continues, and it says, "Ve'afal pi she'ein raya l'davar, zecher l'davar." Even though we don't have a proof to the idea that Tzeis HaKochavim, that when the stars come out, that's the beginning of the night. We may not have a proof to that, but we have an allusion to it, a zecher l'davar. Shenemar, because it says in Sefer Nehemiah, with regard to them working on building up the walls of Yerushalayim, it says, "V'anachnu osim b'molacha," we were doing the work, "V'chetzia machzikim b'ramachim," and half the people were holding spears to guard the workers, "Me'alos hashachar at Tzeis HaKochavim," from dawn until dusk, from dawn until Tzeis HaKochavim, until the stars come out. Ve'omer, and it also says there, in the very next pasuk, V'hayu lanu halayla mishmar, v'hayom melacha. The night was a time for guarding, and the day was a time for working. So, meaning at night there was only guarding, but in the day there was working. So we have that it says we would work with some of the people guarding, from dawn until Tzeis HaKochavim, and the nighttime was the time for guarding, and the daytime was the time for working. Now, Maiva Omer, why do we need the second verse? So the first verse says we worked from it says from dawn until Tzeis HaKochavim, until the stars came out. Now, you might assume that that's the daytime, from dawn, first light, until the stars come out. But we need the second pasuk to prove it, because you might say, Michi arba shimsha leilia. Maybe the nighttime begins at sunset, not at tzeis, not when the stars come out. Already when the sun sets, or begins to set, is nighttime. Ve'inhu dimichshachi umekadmi. And they who worked until tzeis, they were working past the end of the day. Maybe the day ends at sunset, and they just worked until tzeis, but past the end of the day. And maybe the day starts at nates, at the first rays of the sun over the horizon, sunrise, I guess we would call it. And they just started early, when it was still nighttime, at dawn. Maybe from dawn until sunrise is still nighttime. The Gemara seems to be assuming right now that, and that's a fair assumption, that either you should go by when it's completely dark, that should be the nighttime, so from tzeis, from when the stars are out until dawn, or you should go from sunset to sunrise, should be the night. So maybe the nighttime is sunset to sunrise, and they just happen to work until all day long, past the end of the day, past sunset, until the stars came out. And they started early. They started from dawn, even though the daytime doesn't start until sunrise. That's what you could have said. That's why we need the second pasuk. The second pasuk says, Tashma, coming here, V'hayu lanu halayla mishmar v'yom melacha. The night was a time of guarding, the day was a time of working. Meaning, the whole period that they were working was daytime. And we know they were working from dawn until tzeis, until the stars came out. So that means that's the daytime. So it's not a proof, but it's an allusion, at least it's a hint to the idea that the nighttime, or the daytime is from dawn until tzeis, and the nighttime is from tzeis until dawn, from stars until dawn. Stars, by the way, is when it's completely dark. That's when you see stars. So, or 3 stars. So, okay, so that's explaining the opinion of the Chachamim who say that the time for Shema is the nighttime, which is Tzeis HaKochavim, which is the time that the Kohanim enter to eat their Truma. Okay, and Rabbi Meir said that it's when people begin their meal on Friday night, which is apparently a little bit earlier than that. So, now, Kasaka Daitach Da'ani Uvnei Adam Chad Shirahu. Now, you would assume, at first at least, that a poor person's meal begins the same time as when people begin their meal Friday night. So therefore, we might have a problem then. So if you tell me that the poor begin their meals at the same time that the Kohanim start to eat Truma, but you at the same time assume that the poor people begin their meals at the same time that people begin their Friday night meals, so then Chachamim Hainu Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim would be the same as Rabbi Meir. So rather, in other words, because in this brayso we have Rabbi Meir against the Chachamim. Rabbi Meir is saying that the time to start Shema is when people begin their Friday night meal. And the Chachamim are saying that the time to start the Shema in the evening is when the Kohanim begin to eat Truma. So they're arguing. So that's clearly not the same time. And if we assume that a poor person begins his meal at the same time that people begin their Friday night meal, but the poor person also begins their meal at the same time as the Kohanim eat Truma, then that's all at the same time, then the Rabbi Meir wouldn't be arguing on the Chachamim. So what do we have to say? They can't be all saying the same thing, because they're clearly arguing. Elish Ma'amina, so we learn from here, Ani Shir L'chud, V'kohen Shir L'chud. So then maybe we should conclude that the poor person does not eat at the same time as the Kohanim begin to eat their Truma. And that's what we would conclude. Perhaps. Says the Gemara, no, you don't have to say that. You could say the opposite. Ani v'kohen chad shiur. You could say a poor person eats his meal at the same time as the Kohanim eat their Truma, which is Tzeis HaKochavim, which is when the stars come out. Ve'ani b'nei adam lav chad shiuru. But a poor person doesn't eat his meal at the same time that people eat their meals Friday night. Which makes sense because I think it would make sense because we said that the reason Friday night meal would be slightly earlier because all the food's ready already. So you have Rabbi Meir saying this slightly earlier time, that the time of the Shema begins when people begin to eat their Friday night meal. And seemingly, by the way, like it has to connect back to b'shachbecha, to when you lie down. So I guess, I'm not sure, I guess Rabbi Meir sees that as a demarker of like, when you begin dinner, now it's bedtime, perhaps. And that's the beginning of when people are starting to get ready for bed, I guess we could say. And the other opinions are saying that, no, it's slightly later, it's only at dark, at Tzeis HaKochavim, which is when the Kohanim begin to eat their Truma and when the poor begin to eat their meal. Okay. Ask the Gemara, V'ani v'kohen chad shiuru, can you really say that? The poor begin to eat the same time as the Kohanim begin to eat their Truma? V'raminu, but we have another contradiction, another Bryce, and this Bryce is going to give us a whole host of different opinions. From when can you start saying the Shema in the evening? Misha shekidei shayom ba'arvei Shabbosos. It's from the time that Shabbos comes in on Friday night. Divi Rabbi Eliezer? That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. When does Shabbos come in on Friday night? Shabbos begins at sunset. So Rabbi Eliezer says the time that you can that you can say the Shema begins at sunset. Rabbi Yeshua Omer. Rabbi Yeshua says, Misha shekalim metuharim u'le'echol b'trumasan. Rabbi Yeshua says it's from the time that the Kohanim are purified that they can now eat from their Truma. what we've been saying, Tzeis HaKochavim. He says it in a slightly different way, but it's the same. Tzeis HaKochavim, when the stars come out. That's Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Meir says, Misha Kohanim Tovlin Le'echol B'Trumastan. It's from the time that the Kohanim immerse in the mikvah to be able to eat their truma. Now, to that, Rabbi Yehuda responds, Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda said to him, V'halo Kohanim mibod yomim tovlim. But if you're saying it's from the time that they immerse, well, they immerse while it's still daytime. So, because you have to go to the mikvah during the day, before the sun sets. So how can you say they could start eating truma from how can Rabbi Meir say they could start eating truma from when they go to the mikvah? That's still daytime. So Rabbi Yehuda rejects Rabbi Meir. It can't be from when they go in the mikvah, and the Gemara will explain shortly what Rabbi Meir held. Rabbi Chanina says, Misha she'ani nichnas le'echol pito b'melech. It's from the time that an ani, a poor person, enters to eat his bread with salt. It's the time that most people enter to eat. So, we have, I think, 5 opinions. We have Rabbi Eliezer in this brisa. We have 5 opinions. Rabbi Eliezer said it's from the time that Shabbos comes in, which is at Shkia, at sunset. Then we have Rabbi Yoshua said it's the time that the Kohanim begin to eat truma, or purified to eat truma, which is Tzeis HaKochavim, when the stars come out. Then we had Rabbi Meir who said it's from the time that the Kohanim immerse in the mikvah, which we'll have to see when that is. Then we had Rabbi Chanina who said that it's from the time that the poor enter to eat their bread. And then we had Rabbi Acha who said it's from the time that people in general enter to eat their meal on a regular night. V'i amart ani v'kohen chashirahu. Now if you tell me that the time that the Kohanim eat truma is the same time as the poor eat their meal, Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yoshua, then Rabbi Chanina will be saying the same as Rabbi Yoshua. We had both in this brisa. We had Rabbi Yoshua saying it's when the Kohanim eat truma, and we had Rabbi Chanina saying it's when the poor eat their meal. And they're arguing on each other, so they can't be saying the same thing. It can't be that it's the same time. So we can learn from this brisa that it's different times, and it is in fact a machlokas. In the earlier brisa that we mentioned about the poor was arguing on our Mishnah, and here within this brisa we have a dispute regarding this point. We have one opinion saying that the time to say Shema is when the Kohanim can eat truma, and another opinion saying it's when the poor enter to eat their meal. Shema Mina, that's clear. We can learn it from this brisa. It's clear that they're arguing. Now, Ha'minayu Me'uchar, which one is later? Asked the Gemara. Which one is later? Says the Gemara, Mistavra da'ani me'uchar. It would make sense to say that the time that the poor eat is a later time. De'i amar da'ani mukdam, because if you would try to say that the time that the poor person eats is earlier, then Rabbi Chanina hainu Rabbi Eliezer. Then Rabbi Chanina would be saying the same as Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer said sunset. And that's the the next checkpoint before Tzeis, before the stars come out. So you would, if you were to bump him earlier than Tzeis HaKochavim, then the stars coming out, you bump him back apparently to sunset, and that's already taken. That was Rabbi Eliezer, and then he would be saying the same as Rabbi Eliezer, and we'd have the same problem. He seems to be arguing, giving it a different time. So it would seem that his time is a later time. That's what the Gemara comes out. It must be that the time that the poor eat is a bit later. That's what we can learn from here. And Tosfos kind of asked, why can't we stick the time that the ani eats in between? In between sunset and tzeis, in between when the sun sets and the stars come out. Or make him earlier. Maybe he's earlier than the sun setting. So Tosfos says, Lo mistabra l'chalik kol kach b'shuri zman shkiva. It just doesn't make sense to the Gemara to start differentiating in this way of different times that one would go to sleep. I'm not so clear on what Tosfos means, but the question is posed, and Tosfos has an answer and thinks it wouldn't be logical to say that. Apparently, after it's dark, though, we're more free to give different shiurim, different times for when somebody would lie down. Okay. Amar Mar. So now we quote the Mishnah again. Sorry, the Brisa that we just said. Amar le Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Meir had said that the time that you can say Shema is when the Kohanim immerse in the mikvah to purify themselves. To which Rabbi Yehuda said, Amar le Rabbi Yehuda, V'ala Kohanim ibod yomim tovlim. They go to the mikvah while it's still daytime. So how could you say that you could say Shema at that time? It's still daytime. Says the Gemara, Shaper Kamar le Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Meir. Isn't that a good claim? Isn't Rabbi Yehuda's kasha? Isn't his question on Rabbi Yehuda? Isn't Rabbi Yehuda's question on Rabbi Meir a strong question? How can Rabbi Meir say that the time of Shema is when the Kohanim go in the mikvah? They go in the mikvah in the daytime. Rabbi Meir hachi kamar. This is what Rabbi Meir would respond. Mi sabras dana being ashmashos tidach kamina. Do you think I was working with your concept of being ashmashos, your concept of twilight? Ana being ashmashos Rabbi Yossi kamina. I'm dealing with the concept, the being ashmashos of Rabbi Yossi. To Amar Rabbi Yossi, that Rabbi Yossi says, being ashmashos keherifayin, ze nichlas v'ze yotze. Being ashmashos, the twilight time, is keherifayin. It's the blink of an eye. Ze nichlas v'ze yotze. This enters and this leaves. In other words, there's different opinions as to how much before the stars come out would we consider it to still be daytime. And when is the twilight time where it's now no longer, it's kind of the in-between stage. So the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is that the twilight time is for 18 minutes. So 18 minutes before the stars come out, that's the beginning of being ashmashos. I'm saying 18 minutes. It's really, it's the time it takes to walk a mil. Sorry, a half a mil. A mil, the time it takes to walk a mil is 18 minutes. Rabbi Yehuda holds that being ashmashos is half that. The time it takes to walk a half a mil. Some actually have a girsa, the Vilna Gaon changes it to more than half a mil. But it's an extended time before nightfall. And so if the Kohanim will have to go to the mikveh before that time starts. So before the amount of half a mil, we'll call it 9 minutes, I guess for our purposes, before sunset. Now, 9 minutes before sunset, before the stars come out, 9 minutes before the stars come out, he's saying that's still daytime. If they go in the mikveh 9 minutes before the stars come out, there's no way you could say Shema yet at that point. That's what Rabbi Yehuda is telling Rabbi Meir. But Rabbi Meir says back, I don't hold of your twilight zone, your twilight time. I hold that there's no twilight, there is no being ashmash. It's geharifying, it's a moment. The day ends and the night begins, which means that they could go to the mikvah right up until Tzeis HaKochavim, right up until the stars come out. So it's right there at the time that nightfall comes. So that's the shear. That's the time that Rabbi Meir is saying is the time that you could begin saying the Shema. It's right before nightfall. So it's nighttime. It's the time that people are starting to go to lie down. So because his Bein Hashmashos, he holds like Rabbi Yossi that Bein Hashmashos, that the twilight time is clarifying. It's the blink of an eye. It goes straight from day into night. Basically, there is no Bein Hashmashos, and therefore you could go to the mikvah all the way up until nightfall, and it's right then, right before nightfall, that Rabbi Meir is saying is the time for the Shema. So it's Zen Nichnas with Zayotze, this one leaves, and this one enters, this one leaves. V'yefshar lamadol, you can't put your finger on it, you can't stand on it. It's not identifiable at that time of being Hashmashos. One leads right into the next. Now, if that's the case, then Kashya de Rabbi Meir, top of the next page. The Gemara asks, we have a contradiction in Rabbi Meir. Because here Rabbi Meir is saying, in this brayso, Rabbi Meir is saying that the time for Shema begins right before nightfall. At the time of, that you could go in the mikvah, the last moments you could go in the mikvah before nightfall. While earlier he said that it's the time that people eat their meal, enter to eat their meal on Erev Shabbos. It's the time that people enter to eat their meal on Erev Shabbos. So, which Rashi says is apparently later than this time. So, in other words, I think there's different Tosfos, I think, disagrees with this. According to Tosfos, you eat your meal Friday night early. And I think that's what I was assuming earlier when we talked about the Friday night meal. I assumed, like Tosfos, that it's an earlier time than nightfall. In which case the contradiction here would be the Rabbi Meir saying it's right before nightfall, right when the Kohanim immerse, and earlier he had said that the time is when people begin their Friday night meal, which according to Tosfos is earlier than that. According to Rashi, it's later. But okay, either way, it's not the same time. So we have a contradiction in Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara answers, Trei Tanai Aliba de Rabbi Meir. Yeah, we have two traditions in terms of what Rabbi Meir held, and they're in contradiction, but it's a machlokas, it's a debate as to what Rabbi Meir held. Kash de Rabbi Eliezer. Well, we also have a contradiction in Rabbi Eliezer, because in this brayso, Rabbi Eliezer says that you can start saying Shema already from sunset, when Shabbos comes in, when Kiddush Hayom, when Shabbos enters, which is sunset. And in the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer says it's when the Kohanim begin to eat their truma. The Mishnah says, from when do you start saying Shema in the evening? It's from when the Kohanim enter to eat their truma until the end of the first watch. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. So in the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer said that the time that you can say Shema is when the Kohanim enter to eat truma, which is Tzeisak Kochavim. So the Brisa says it's from sunset, and the Mishnah says it's from Tzeisak Kochavim, when the stars come out. So the contradiction of Rabbi Eliezer. Answers the Gemara, Trei Tanai Aliba de Rabbi Eliezer. We'll say the same answer. It's a dispute as to what Rabbi Eliezer held. Two different opinions, two different traditions as to what Rabbi Eliezer held. V'bayisema, or if you want, you could give a different answer. Reisha lav Rabbi Eliezer. The first opening line of the Mishnah was not Rabbi Eliezer. Again, the Mishnah read, from when can you start saying the Shema in the evening? From the time the Kohanim enter to eat their truma until the end of the first watch. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara is suggesting that only the second clause, until the end of the first watch, was the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. That's what he held. But in terms of when the time starts, he didn't say anything in the Mishnah. We have a Tanakam, we have a Star Mishnah, unidentified opinion in the Mishnah that it starts from Tzeisak Kochavim, when the stars come out, when the Kohanim enter to eat their truma, but that wasn't Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer we have in our Brisa. Rabbi Eliezer holds it's from when Shabbos comes in, then when Shabbos begins, which would be from sunset. That would be the time that you could begin saying the Shema according to Rabbi Eliezer. So either it's a machlokas of what Rabbi Eliezer held, or the Mishnah is not actually Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, only the Brisa is, and Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is certainly that you can start saying the Shema from sunset, from when the time that Shabbos comes in, which is sunset. Okay, we will hold here and pick up from the fourth line next time.